to another episode of the Beyond the Device podcast, where we explore the life-defining moments that shape careers within the medical device industry. We are particularly interested in understanding how personal experiences, challenges, or pivotal events influence professional journeys. And as we progress through the conversation, we will eventually land on the question, what is the one defining moment or experience that changed everything and set you on the path that you're onto today? Today's guest has made a real impact on quality organisations and how they actually work, not just on paper, but in practice. They're currently the VP of QARA at Trinity Biotech, and they're also the MD of their own consulting company, where they help companies build more effective, less complicated quality organisations. He's the co-author of Transforming Quality Organisations, a Practical Guide, as well as Untangle, Building Simpler Organisations, and also a number of QMS publications that have become go-to references for quality leaders who are trying to build systems that actually work in the real world. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Matt Wictome.
Hello, welcome.
Hello.
Good to join you.
Hi there, Matt, and great summary there from Nathan, but what we're really interested to start with is where your story began. So can you tell us a bit about your early years?
Well, I mean, the intro was really impressive. I thought, well, this person must know what they're talking about, and any listener would say, I better listen to them. But I don't think I can convince individuals of that. But hopefully over the next half an hour, I'll give some of my perspectives over the last 20 years, some of the challenges I've had, some of the tools I've used. So we'll talk about quality, and we'll talk about quality systems, because that's obviously my passion. But obviously some of the things we will talk about are applicable to, if you're not working in quality. So I think that's the sort of thread that I'll sort of try and weave throughout that. In terms of my early life, how far back do you want to go? My childhood, school.
How far do you remember?
This is quite useful self-reflection, because we tend to only look back in months or look forward in months. We don't tend to sit down and reflect on our sort of junior years. But in doing that, my school years were I was a very anxious, nervous child. It was between 10 and 13. That was not a happy time for me on reflection. And in those days, anxiety and such like that wasn't a dish on the menu then. In the 70s, you simply that wasn't something you had an option to have help with. And those early years were quite difficult in terms of finding out who I was and what I wanted to do. And I think as a parent, and one of the things I think I certainly didn't do right is underestimate how difficult it is for children growing up. Certainly in the 70s when I grew up, and massively more now in terms of the pressures that kids have, in terms of they're going through growth, emotional growth, physical growth, society's changing. Basically, when people say they got a very difficult job and never had a bad week at work, I think if you reflect back to some of these school years, for some individuals, it's actually far worse. Actually, some of those times are actually quite difficult, and the role of teachers, and we'll come on to that, are really quite pivotal in changing individuals. And that for me was a pivotal point. So up to when I was about 13, I wasn't backward at school. I was not top of the class at all, but I got put in a grammar school by my parents. They had the foresight to say, look, this guy needs some help. And I got connected with an absolutely inspirational teacher, Mrs. Livingston. She was an inspirational science teacher. And one thing she did, she ignited my passion in a subject which I actually excelled, and I didn't know I excelled. It was chemistry. I was really good at chemistry. It was like maths, without the numbers. It was just absolutely, I absolutely loved it. But one thing she did, she actually noticed an ability in me that I didn't actually see at the time. And I think that all good teachers and great teachers can see that. They can actually teach to obviously the high end of the class and do the basics, but actually seeing an individual that has the potential and nurturing that and growing that and igniting that. So when I was between 13 and 16, I realised that I was actually quite good at it, and actually that was the passion that drove me in the sort of science direction. And throughout my life, I've had sort of a dichotomy between science and creation and such like. But in those days, I was naturally, pulled towards, the life sciences. And I went to university and studied biochemistry because I wanted to know about how things were, how life was built. And all of that was ignited by a single individual in a class, I think. So that is, you talk about pivotal moments in your life where you sort of change direction. That was one pivotal moment when I was 13. I met Mrs. Livingston, and she spent time with me to sort of educate me. And at that time, the school was really small. It didn't even have a chemistry O-level course. She said, well, I can't teach it because I'm not allowed to. It's not on the curriculum. But here's a book, read it, and I'll put you through to the exam. So that was how it all started. And looking back, if that hadn't happened, I don't know. I mean, life would have, gone in another direction, and I'd be talking to somebody else about something else. But that was my early years. That was a pivotal moment, I think.
Yeah.
In terms of my younger life, my parents was in the army. He was a medic, and we moved around a lot. And the flip side of that, I spent a lot of my early years, in 10, 11, 12 in Germany. And the flip side of that is there was no television. All my information about the world was through reading. So that actually had a really positive flip side, that I was a voracious reader at that age. I just read and read and read because that was my medium. There wasn't really any television at all. I think there was Lassie once on Sunday in black and white, and that was it. But for my, so I think that sort of knowledge building, passion, connecting with my teacher when I was about 13, that really sort of ignited the passion in me.
Yeah, that early exposure. We find so many guests that have either gone down the engineering route, have spent weekends in their grandfather's garage tinkering with things,
Yeah.
or books from a scientific
Absolutely,
perspective, and the encouragement of a teacher or a parent. And then when you then started to get to your later education and look at university.
Yeah, I did biochemistry as an undergraduate, and it was probably the natural progression to do a PhD, and I did that, and I was good at it, and then I did a postdoc, and then I realised that really, I needed to do something more practical. I wanted to go into the life sciences. I wanted to go into companies that help people. So I didn't want to go into factories that made paper clips. No disrespect to those people who do that, but I wanted to do something that was connected with people's health, and that's really been the thread throughout my life in terms of my connection with my job. So I did. Then I moved to Portland down in the UK, working on vaccines and such like for 7 years with the health system there, and then I jumped into a big multinational in my probably mid-20s. I moved to Johnson and Johnson, which is obviously sort of a massive company with massive subsidiaries, and I was thrown into a really different environment, but a big corporate entity that had a lot of opportunity to grow you. But that was, and that wasn't pre-planned. There was no sort of master plan. I sat down when I was in my early teens or in 20s to say this is what I want to do. It really was. I generally knew what direction I wanted to go, but the details I couldn't fill in yet. So that's the advice I'd give to people. Work out generally where you want to go. Don't get worried about the details. What area do you want to work in? Do you want to work in on your own with other people? What sort of companies? You got to ask yourself those questions and come up with the answers, and then the bits you can sort of fill in as you sort of move forward, I think. But I landed up in Johnson and Johnson for 17 years, and I left, and then that company, the company I was working for, Author Clinical Diagnostics, which is a diagnostics firm, it got sold, and basically I left employment there. But actually, very early in my career, in probably 2001, I moved from being an R&D, technical support role, which was really based on my knowledge of biochemistry, of how assays work, how technology works, really quite the grounding in a completely different direction. I met one of the quality managers, and I was actually in the technical support group there. Said, did you want to be a quality engineer? And I said, oh yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that. I didn't know what the hell a quality engineer did. But I spent some time in the quality engineering group. Much to the hilarity of my kids, that I had engineering in my job title for somebody that's completely mechanically inept. I could call myself an engineer of some sort, but I spent time in quality engineering, and then I moved up into that group. And then I moved through the different quality groups over the years, really picking up some of the things that I've learned over the last sort of couple of decades. And I've stayed in quality, and a lot of people, especially with my family, don't understand, what does quality do? It's not something you can easily articulate to certain people. What does a quality engineer do? What does a quality professional do? But I've obviously stayed in the industry because I've got a real passion that this is a really important space to help people and help companies and help patients. And I think we'll come on to that. I think sometimes that's lost in the regulations and IVDR and all of the sort of stuff that's coming out. This passion that you are connecting with people that are actually having blood tests or things inserted into them, and that you're changing their lives in real positive ways. So my movement into sort of quality and quality systems was, again, it wasn't a predefined, master plan. It was just a chance moment with the manager saying, "Do you want to do this?" "Oh yeah, I'll give that a go." And I think my advice to people would be, give it a go. If you can always pull out and go in nothing direct, nothing's set in stone. Very often you just don't want to take risks, but you take a risk, because I think that very often will pay off. And if it doesn't, you've lost nothing. So that's generally how I ended up with where I am now, in terms of the industry and the sort of the function I'm in.
And you mentioned about a turning point, and it was the teacher, I think it was, that sort of steered you in that direction. But if you think about where you are right now today, is there a sort of bigger, more one-defining moment or experience
there's been a
in
few.
your life?
Before I left, we'll come on to the sort of the big changes in my life. It sort of happened about 5 years ago. But I did a master's in strategy, change, and leadership with Bristol University, and that was you went away for a week every sort of a couple of months, and you sort of did that for 2 years. And up to then, I'd had a lot of training in process excellence and lean, and a lot of engineering sort of tech methodologies in terms of how you make organisations and you make businesses slicker and more efficient and more reliable. And that was a really big grounding in that sort of technology. But at the time, I was having this bit of angst in that, even though across the industry we've employed these methodologies for numbers of years, we don't have perfect factories. You go into any normal factory, there's firefighting and issues and things changing, and everybody's life is like that. But one of the courses, one of the lectures I had in the course in Bristol was by a lady called Jean Bolton, and she wrote a book called Embracing Complexity, and basically it talks about complexity theory. And if you said to me, actually, you're going to go into this lecture and 45 minutes you're going to come out and your view of the world will be completely different, absolutely different, I would have said, no, nonsense. But actually, her lecture on complexity theory, of actually how the world actually does work with the different interactions, and it's not a machine. So basically, if you're trying to force machines type thinking on organisations or systems or processes, you get frustrated because they're not like that. We're human beings. We've got emotions. We interact. So her sort of whole avenue of new thought about complexity theory really did resonate with me, and I started to apply that within the quality system. And that's probably where I'm distinct from other quality managers and quality sort of professionals, in that my company sort of focuses on the real world of quality systems and the real organizations, which are messy, horrible, changing, very hard to pin down, but trying to apply the aspirations of quality in those organizations is a challenge. So that was a pivotal moment towards the end of my masters, that I actually had a completely different view of the world. And I talked to another guy who was more or less my equivalent in terms of he had the same sort of engineering background, and he goes, "Well, I can't go back to my organisation and talk about this because it's heresy. It really is heresy. To an engineer, the idea you can't control everything and you can't nail everything down is just you don't say that." So he understood that this was quite revolutionary, thinking, which in social sciences has been around for many years. And many big organisations, the NHS and big corporations, are seeing complexity theory as a real way of understanding their business, the real business that you work in. It's not just, it's not this bolting things together in a process. It's how all of those different systems interact, and basically that does require a different behaviour in a leader, I think, in terms of understanding that. But that was a little pivotal moment that I just happened to be on the course. Jean Bolton just happened to come in and give that lecture, and she's got some great lectures on YouTube. Go and see them. Absolutely amazing. So that just opened my eyes to a whole new world that I didn't think was I could learn. I thought in my mid-40s I couldn't learn anything new, but then instantly 45 minutes later my view of the world had changed. So it is these pivotal moments that change.
Yeah, I think that, and then you listen to one podcast on something completely random, and you change your behaviour off the back of it.
Yeah, I still read voraciously, and I read a book and something will resonate with me, and it'll send me, I didn't think of that. So it's actually quite, I think the cheapest form of continuous improvement, I'd say, is self-reflection and reading, and that really, that's completely free. So that is, and very often you don't know where that's going to lead. I think it's really quite exciting at times.
And you made a reference to something 5 years ago in terms of a turning point. Is that something you'd want to?
Yeah, that was probably
share?
The turning point. It was. the idea that people listening, I think, my God, that's a great story, because he's come to the position now that he's got his own business, and he's got a very well paid job within a sort of a big company. That's all success. But generally, I'm sure you two and others, life isn't like that. Life does have challenges, and it has ups and downs, and you've got to face them. So very often you look in LinkedIn with the LinkedIn profiles of people looking professional, and pictures of people, young people in offices, doing that, and then basically it's all successful. But really, the world isn't like that. Every single person that's got a LinkedIn account has got some challenge in their life that they're working their way through. So 2019 was quite a pivotal year that I had, because a number of things happened all at the same time. The first one was I was made redundant. So after sort of nearly 20 years within a corporation in a quite a senior position, basically the business said to me, "We don't want you to be with us anymore." And that was.
And what month was that in 2019?
That was in probably early spring, May. So that was
okay. So just trying to time it in with COVID. Was it drops on you at that point?
Yeah, and that was to come. That was another variant that sort of will come into sort of added to the mix as well. But that happened in 2019, and I don't think you should underestimate, the power of redundancy on individuals in terms of changing their lives, and it's guys like you in terms of recruiters. I think we've got a real role in helping people get through that and walk them through that, to say actually, there is a way forward in terms of that, because very often, especially if you're a male, your self-identity and your worth is defined by your job and your position, and suddenly overnight that sort of disappears, and it's very hard to actually sort of get through that at times, to understand what's happening. So that happened at the same time. I was also going through a divorce, and no divorce is easy. That's always a mess. That's always difficult. It's always, your emotions are all over the place. So that was happening at the same time. At the same time, I was trying to do my dissertation for my master's, and my head wasn't really in the right place in terms of getting that together. And the final thing is, I had a really bizarre cycling accident, and people say, "Oh, well, you're on the road and you fell off your bike." No, I didn't. I was on a stationary bike, and one of my shorts were too tight. But the repercussions that I stripped the nerve from one of my legs in terms of the myelin sheath. So basically, I couldn't walk for 6 months. I was in extreme pain. I needed a stick. So basically, I was redundant, going through a divorce, in severe pain all the time, and I was trying to put my masters together, and all of these things were happening at the same time. And one thing I did do, and this was bad. I self-medicated with drink, and that was a period that I just tried to numb it all out. So I didn't know what I was going to do in my life. I hadn't formed my new company at all. So that was a pivotal moment of what direction am I going to go in, what am I going to do. And I sort of self-reflected over that time, and I wrote a Guardrails, a book about sort of 10 sort of things that I learned about myself in terms of how to keep me on the straight and narrow. But that period was a pivotal moment of getting through that.
And were you at that point? Can you kind of put into words what you were actually feeling?
I don't. It was, in many ways, it was a blur. It was actually there were a few months it was an actual blur. I just don't remember anything about that time at all. It was I was highly emotional, and my partner, I just met a lady called Sarah, and we're going to get married shortly, and she actually helped me immensely. She just was non-judgmental. She was just there and saying, "Look, you want to talk about it," and basically she helped me just get through those sort of those. But at the time, it was panic, anxiety. What am I going to do? It really was quite a difficult period. But out of that, I had to sort of do some, serious self-reflection about what I wanted to do with my life, what I wanted to achieve, and in terms of where I was going to go. And that took some time. That took some sort of, And the first thing I said, eventually I've got to stop drinking. I've just got to stop doing it. I've got to stop self-medicating. I have to basically face the facts, and that has got to go. And so since that day, I've not. After I got there through that period, I've not.
And obviously, on that point, it's probably easier said than done. Just to say, right, that today's the day. Or did you get help for that? What was the process for you?
I mean, I've been I've dabbled with not drinking for periods, many before, but I think that the bit that helped me mentally was, well, this is what's going to happen if you continue. And do you know that? And basically, this is is it worth that? Is it worth that? You're not going to focus on your new business. You're not going to focus on your client. You're not going to focus on a job. You're not going to focus on your family. You're going to lose all that if you want to do this. And that sort of, when you tie that up, you think, well, it's a no-brainer. Basically, it's an absolute no-brainer. So then I think, well, actually, if I do that, what if I set up my own business with my own philosophy that is sort of based on some of the complexity learnings I had? What if I really went for it? What if I focused completely? And you're probably in the same position with your business. What if I really gave it a go? I don't want to look back 5 years later and say, oh, I wish I had just not stopped. I had stopped drinking then, or focus more. Well, no, you don't want that conversation with yourself. You want the conversation of, I did everything physically possible and mentally within my powers to do it, and that's a good conversation to have. I don't want the other conversation. So that was the driver really, in terms of what I was going to lose, but also gain if I just really went for it, and that's more or less where I've sort of kept going, I think.
Shows a lot of self-awareness. A lot of self-awareness.
At the time, no. I mean, a lot of times, some days I couldn't talk, or I was just in tears all the time. So there wasn't but it was a slow, it was a slow day by day. You moved in that direction. I worked with a former colleague, Ian Wells, who gave me some work, and that led to some more work. And then I thought, well, I'm quite enjoying this. I'm quite good at this, and that made. So it was small steps that were in the right direction. So I think the advice to people is you can't go from a desperate position to perfection. It's not. You can't jump in that way.
And what's the time period there?
Probably it's probably 6 years ago now in terms of.
But I mean, from the worst you were feeling to then taking that first step to being at a point where you're seeing progress, not the finished article.
Probably about 10 months. And when we go into spring, you go into spring 2020, and then this was I've got some work.
COVID.
I've got some work. I've got a client in Barcelona. Pick up the phone, they ring, say, don't come over. It's March. Don't come over. We're in lockdown. It's called lockdown. We're not going to go and see it. I said, well, it'll be over in a few weeks. And then, of course, setting up your own business in the middle of lockdown, with the middle of COVID, was not the best thing to do. But I just had to work my way through that. But the whole technology of helping clients remotely and then building the website and building my thinking. And at that time, I thought, well, actually, why don't I write down what I think about and what I believe? Because if I can get it on paper, at least I can get it on paper. And I said to Ian Wells, the colleague I was working with, do you want to write a book together on quality? Because there's not many books about quality organisations and how to improve them. A lot of people say, but no, let's just write one. And we wrote Transforming Quality Organisations based on our thinking, and that was quite pivotal, because even in that time where I couldn't go and visit clients, I could force myself to go and write what I believed in. And I encourage anybody to write a book, write out what you think. A lot of people say, oh, I think this, but write it down, because it might be quite useful for yourself to clarify whether you believe that or not, or it's somebody else's belief. So that, even in that period, it was quite useful to just focus myself on writing, because I came to the conclusion I've got a lot of experience and knowledge, and a lot of it's learned through mistakes, but actually getting that down on paper and helping other individuals. So the series of books I've had over the last probably 6 months, I've sort of built on that, and I'm not doing them to make money. They are help for they're freely available on my website. They're my perspective on quality and how you could help those organisations. So I've done that through obviously publications, but the blogs and whatnot. So I think that is a creative period, that element of my life that I think is quite important to sort of continue to share that. I think, because yeah, exactly.
I was going to say, I think that time period is probably when we first started talking. And obviously wouldn't have any idea what was actually going on behind the scenes, or what you'd gone through to get to the point to offer yourself as a consultant.
No, it took a while, and probably my biggest fear now, apart from my family or friends becoming ill, is that I'm going to run out of time. I'm in my late 50s, and I've got probably another 10 years goodness in me. So every day I'll get up with what's this day going to be in terms of sharing that knowledge and helping and doing that. So that is a real driver forward in terms of because eventually you're all going to die, but you're younger in your careers, and I think this dawning in my life came relatively late. I didn't get this dawning in my 20s and 30s, because very often you've got kids and a mortgage, and you just want to do the corporate job and get the salary and pay the mortgage and feed the kids, and then your focus is very much on that. You don't very often take a step back and go, well, what do I want to do in my life? Because life takes over. I think the biggest learning over the last sort of 10 years is you've got to drive what you want, or life will tell you what is going to give you, and you're going to have to react to it. So it's not easy because you've got to make decisions that are imperfect, I think.
There's so many lessons in there already, whether they were conscious at the time in terms of frameworks, habits that you did. But I think on reflection now, you're in a better place. Is there anything that you do more intentionally now in terms of managing your mental health?
Obviously, my calendar is yours is probably chocker. So I basically, early in the morning before work day starts, I have an hour, and I call it admin. It looks really boring, but it is the stuff just to reflect and declutter and work out what's important and what's important, what's urgent, and really sort of take stock of the day before you get into the day, and then you basically buffeted by events and stuff. So I think carving out a bit of time for yourself, I think, is really key. Whether you do it at the beginning of the day or the end, it doesn't really matter. But doing that and actually taking a step back and self-reflecting, I think, of where you're going, and I think you've got to force yourself to do that. And a lot of people do that through exercise or meditation or reading or walking the dog. But I think whatever you way, it doesn't really matter, as long as you just take some time out to reflect. Are you going in the right direction? Are you where you want to be, and what do you need to do to move in a slightly different direction if you need to, with the understanding that you can't necessarily change everything, and you've got to live. I think one of the learnings is you've got to live it with the world that exists now, not the world you think you want or you believe should be. It's the world you live in then. So in 2019, the world I lived in there was, I didn't have a job, I was going through a divorce, I was in massive pain, I was drinking too much, I didn't know what I was doing. I had to address that world then. It wasn't the world that I couldn't complain about my divorce or my loss of job, or I just had to deal with it then. So I think that's a thread, I think, in terms of in guardrails, is you've got to face the facts and deal with the world as it is and have a sense of perspective of where you are. So I think in terms of mental health, and trying to switch off. A lot of people do it through sport and trying to disengage from work, but I've come back from a 2-week holiday in Spain, and most of the mornings I've been writing, because I really love writing, and so Sarah, my fiance, said, "Well, you're writing it." Well, I'm enjoying it. This is my de-link from work, because I'm writing about something I can just go in any direction. So that's. But I think everybody's got to find out what their sort of stress relief point is, and then.
I've discovered one recently, and it's colouring in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every time I'm with my nieces, I do that.
Yeah, if you've got kids, you've got a great excuse, haven't you? But you can get adult colouring books now that are quite therapeutic.
Yeah. My partner got me them for Christmas last year, and it's been the last 2 or 3 months I've been doing them every day.
Yeah, it's great because it lets your mind. It's like gardening, I suppose. It lets your mind wander, but you're doing something. So I think it's quite useful that you find something.
There's a link between writing and journaling and the advice given around it to get your thoughts on paper. So the link between writing and thoughts, and with what you've been through, I'm interested in what your relationship is like with your inner talk, because anxiety is usually linked to the voice inside your head, and you can note bouts of anxiety dating back to your childhood. So what's your relationship like with your inner talk?
I think since I've given up drink, it's completely different, because one of the things that happens when you get off the booze is that obviously your health improves and your sleep's better and all of that stuff. That's all, and you lose weight and just. But one thing that does happen is I found that my brain is rewired, basically. So after years of treating anxiety through self-medication, it's basically a bit of a doom loop, because you medicate and then you get anxious and then it continues. But the anxiety that I had and the worries I had, 5-6 years ago aren't there. The idea that I could have a talk to you and I'd do a podcast would have absolutely driven me up the wall. And prior to that, I would have left lectures with panic attacks, and basically that is my sense of perspective of the world and myself and worth and understanding has changed, and that hasn't been through any sort of therapy. It's just my brain has rewired itself, and basically it's now a different. And that does take years, I think. I've noticed over the years, rather than if you give up drink on a Monday and Friday, and you're going to be a different person, you're not. But you are going to see incremental changes in your personality. So I think that is my endless. I'm aware of anxiety, but I'm aware that is not something that defines me. That's not something that is a label that is going to stop me. And it's in many ways, when I see anxiety coming on, I know what it's about, and so it's a case. Don't make it go away. You still go into. I still give presentations, and I just stumble on words, and I can't find the word, and then that causes me to be stressed, and I can't find the other word, and then I bash my way through it, and I'm sure people are watching, going, I didn't notice anything.
Yeah.
I didn't notice anything at all.
Yeah.
But in your mind, it's like the biggest thing, and it's like it's terrible. But actually, in the real world, people don't notice really.
I think everyone's just in their own head, worrying about themselves.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's short of you dropping dead on the stage. They're probably not going to notice at all.
I remember doing a presentation at a CETA event, and I was convinced I was shaking so much that the screen was wobbling up and down. And then when I finished, I went and said to my colleagues, I was like, "Did you see the screen?" They're like, "What are you talking about?" And I was convinced it was just
because your mind
it was just me that was moving
tricks
apparently.
on you. So, but I think
yeah.
knowing your mind is playing tricks on you does help in terms of how you understand that. And the chimp paradox that you've probably read that book. That's really good at explaining what this is all about. This is a very primordial behaviour that your sort of ancient part of your brain is dominant then, and saying actually you're in danger, you need to run off, and this is going to kill you. No, it's not. You're giving a presentation about about non-conformances or whatever. It's not. This is not life-threatening, but your brain is designed to sort of make it a bigger thing than others.
So what advice would you give to someone facing their own turning point or life challenges?
I mean, I wrote guardrails because I basically wanted to distill it down to things that were going to keep me on that straight and narrow. So I think you've got to. I mean, it sounds really clear. You've got to ask yourself what you want. I mean, that really is the only, and understand that the only person to give you what you want is you. Really, at the end of the day, the world isn't going to change around you and be sorry for you. And it's got to be, and that doesn't have to be like you do it in 20 minutes and it's done. That is, you've got to go back to it and say, I think about this, and maybe not, and then you've got to. So I think, going through that, and also the belief that, I think the advice I'd give to my younger self when I was sort of 10, 11, 12, 13 would be, Matt, it'll be all right. It's going to be all right. It'll be different and ups and downs, but actually you're not going to die. You're just going to be all right. You're going to get through life, and it's going to be different. You can't predict it, but it will be fine. So I think the advice at the time is, you will get through it in some way. It may be not the answer you wanted. It may be different, but you will get through that. But in the intensity of all of that, when you've got big life-changing events, you don't see that. You don't hear any of that. You kick against that when somebody says to you, "Oh, you've been made redundant." That's a blessing in disguise. I thought, "What a bollocks!" But actually, it was. Without that, I wouldn't have written the books. I wouldn't have set my own business up. I wouldn't have done other things. So it was a turning point in my life. But it doesn't take away the pain of those events in people's lives. That it does. You have to get through them. I think as I said, I think you guys helping people get through them. What can you give in terms of if your post is redundant, it doesn't mean you're redundant as a person. You've got qualities and experiences that can be shared. And I think very often when you're towards the end of your work life, you feel that it's all over, and basically but it's not. If anything, I'm of the belief that it's the last 5 years of my life has flourished far more than it had in the 20s or 30s. So it's not a case of it's the beginning. It might be not as long as I want, but it'll be a beginning. So I think that's the feedback I give, and talk to people. Articulate with loved ones or friends, or if you want some advice. And anybody wants to contact me and say, look, I'm not a therapist, but I can share where I was, and if they want a sense of perspective of what helped me, I think. But I think it's easy to give advice at the time, but when you're on the receiving end going through that, it's very hard to accept because it is traumatic. It is quite difficult.
So looking forward then. So you said your biggest fear is time running out. So where do you see yourself? We can split it personally, professionally, maybe they're the same thing.
Well, professionally, I'm working with a great company, Trinity Biotech. We've got some great, exciting technology in the CGM space in terms of glucose monitoring. That's going to come out shortly. So it's in a very exciting place in terms of where I'm sort of helping a client, bring that to market, and that will be, I can't say a lot, but that's going to sort of revolutionise some of the stuff out there. So I'm working closely with Trinity, to try and help the organisation, have been over the last couple of years, transform itself and help itself, get ready for the new future. But obviously, I work with other companies, and through my consultancy, I sort of straddled sort of two horses. But I'm focusing very much on Trinity now. But I'm certainly, minded to go and help other organisations and businesses. And for me, it's not the money or the status or anything like that. It's more around, is there a connection with the industry and the client that they got something they need help with, and I can help them, and then that is very fulfilling for me. So it's not just this is the dollars or anything like that. It's more I've turned down higher paid dollars just for work that I feel more passionate about than just the monetary value. So from a professional perspective, I don't know. Would I be within Trinity, forever? Probably not. But I know I'd be helping other clients over the next couple of years, and I'm sort of balancing up every day. Where can I give the both benefit to myself and the clients I work with. My personal life, I'm due to get married. So I met Sarah in my dark days. We've been together 10 years, and basically, so we're sort of set up. We bought a house together. The life is very, very different. So that's I've become a grandfather twice. So I've got two little boys that they're under 3. So they're sort of I'm reliving those years again in terms of children. So that's a different dimension. But yeah, so what the future holds, I don't know. But I think what I've learned is something's going to happen. It's going to be bad. Some of it's going to be good. You just got to work your way through it in terms of how you get through that. I'm sure you found it's not all a bed of roses. Trying to run a business is quite challenging and stressful, and you think you're not going to do it, but actually, I think the important thing is to take a step back every now and again and just self-reflect. This okay? This is what I'm going to do. That is quite powerful, I think, and we don't tend to do that. We tend to sort of get on the hamster wheel and go for it and not take a step. And that's probably one of my, looking back at my regrets in my 20s and 30s, I didn't take a step back and say, look, where are you going into your life? I could have made life-changing decisions earlier on in my life that would have had bigger consequences in the long run than having those dawning moments in my sort of early 50s.
So if you, I can think of some of the takeaways that I've personally gained from this conversation. One of them is just this too shall pass. I think when you're in the situation and experience it, you maybe can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and there's lots of great advice that on reflection is true. Like you said, this is a blessing. And in current market conditions where people are being made redundant, people are coming to the end of contracts, and there's that uncertainty. It's in times like this that new business has started, the side hustles. And
absolutely, yeah.
so if you were to summarize one key lesson from your journey to leave our listeners with, what would that be?
I think it's have a sense of perspective. I think at times, one of the things I was sort of reflecting on when in my drinking years, when you drink, you tend to, exaggerate things. You tend to overreact to certain things that you think are bigger than they really are. But also you underreact to things that you should be addressing and facing up to you don't. So I think one great thing is to just have a sense of perspective. Are the things you're dealing with now, are they really big things that are going to be an issue in the future? I understand Cher's got this like a 5-year rule. It's basically if she's got an issue, she'll ask herself, am I going to be worried about this in 5 years' time? And if she says, well, I'm not, then she said, I'm not worried about it now. Then so that is her demarcation of whether something's important or not. And it's quite a good rule because basically you ask yourself, well, is this a big deal? It sounds a big deal now, but actually, is it really? So that sense of perspective is quite important because then you tend to focus on big things you can, are your relationships working? Are you in a job you want to do? What's, all of that, and basically you can focus on that. With the acceptance, you can't fix everything, and this is the sort of understanding I've got. There are facets of my life are just as is. They are. I can't fix them any further than what I've done. So I can't dwell on them and beat myself up about it. It's just a case of that's the way it is. So I think having a sense of where that issue sits in the grand scheme, I think is really important. I think, and that really helps. But again, it's very difficult to do that, and very often you need somebody to ask those questions to you in terms of what do you think you should do? Is this a big deal? And having that dialogue, I think, is quite important. Even if it's a dialogue with yourself, I think that's quite valuable at times. If you can self-reflect, and some people can't self-reflect, and they struggle with that. But I think asking questions to yourself and saying, "Is this really what I want to do?"
Well, as we said at the start of the conversation, this wasn't going to be a podcast about job titles or companies. This was about the person behind the story, and you've been very gracious to share a lot of your personal journey in recent years, and I think it's a great example for so many people going through.
No, it's been. If anybody can sort of take some nuggets that will help them, then great. It's been worth the 40 minutes of talking through. So yeah, I welcome the opportunity, and great idea. This is absolutely should be applauded for setting something up like this, because it is very different, I think.
Thank you. And to our guests who have listened today, if you feel like you've got your own turning points and stories to share, please get in touch to discuss being a future guest. Please like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify, and we'll be back next time with another guest. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.